Hey guys, tonight we slip into the salt-tanged air of a Polynesian shoreline, where the day's heat clings stubbornly to the sand, and the waves roll in with their steady hush. You feel the grainy bite of coral fragments under your feet, the way they press insistently into your heels as you wander closer to where the village gathers. They're crouched low, men and women alike, sketching broad canoe shapes with sticks and toes. Lines arc, curves wobble, and debates spark as one elder insists the bow must sweep more elegantly, while another points out that function should trump flair. You can almost laugh, because in a place where storms and currents decide life or death, the first step is apparently doodling in the sand. And just so you know, you probably wouldn't survive this. Those Pacific swells are not forgiving. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. If you feel like sharing, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The shoreline crowd murmurs in the dusk, and you realize this is how it begins. Not with chisels, not with cord, but with finger-traced arcs in sand that tides will erase by dawn. The smell of dried pandanus leaves and smoked fish drifts by, reminding you that people have been standing here for centuries, trying to agree on what shape a boat should be. A mainstream fact slips in. Polynesian canoes were among the most sophisticated vessels of the pre-modern world, capable of voyaging thousands of miles across the Pacific. But tonight, they don't look like engineering marvels. They look like children's sketches. The villagers mutter and erase, redrawing the stern, squabbling whether the keel line ought to tilt just a finger's breadth deeper. You kneel with them, pressing your palm into the sand for scale. Someone marks out where the mast might go, another scuffs it away, claiming the balance will be off. Already the seeds of endless sand debates are sprouting. The quirky tidbit here? Some traditions say builders would smooth patches of beach into long, shallow drafting tables of sand, walking up and down them for hours, comparing imaginary hulls as if inspecting invisible ships. Imagine an architect's office, but barefoot, sunburned, and occasionally interrupted by crabs. The longer you watch, the more hypnotic it becomes. Their sticks scratch like pens, gestures looping like calligraphy. They don't need paper. The beach itself is the notepad. Historians still argue whether these early outlines were symbolic rituals or practical blueprints. Were they sketching for the gods' approval or genuinely calculating curvature? You lean back, considering that even now, modern boat designers fuss with computer models that get erased with one keystroke. Nothing really changes, just the medium, sand or silicon. A young boy runs through the lines, giggling as he disrupts hours of careful tracing. Nobody scolds him, they just sigh and redraw. The tide keeps creeping closer, swallowing their efforts, forcing them to start fresh. It's almost comic, humanity versus ocean, round one. But it's also serene. You hear the hush of surf like a metronome to their patient work. They aren't rushing. After all, the canoe that will carry their children's lives deserves a bit of bickering and a lot of erasing. The smell of salt sticks in your throat, and the sand under your nails feels gritty as you press a line yourself, pretending you know what you're doing. The stars rise one by one overhead, and soon they'll guide the very same canoes these sketches anticipate. For now, though, you're just one more participant in the twilight arguments. Tracing curves on a canvas the moon will soon wash clean. You stand at the edge of the clearing where logs lie waiting, thick trunks hauled from inland groves, their bark still damp with sap. The night air is warmer here, heavier with the resinous scent of freshly cut wood. A group of men squat around one log, poking and tapping like judges at a fruit contest. Breadfruit wood has its champions, lightweight, buoyant, easy to shape. But then comes the chorus of Koa loyalists who swear by its sturdiness, even if it's stubborn to carve. Someone throws in pandanus trunks for good measure, and the argument blooms like wildfire. You shift your weight in the sand, realizing that Polynesian canoe building is not just craft, its committee. A mainstream fact to anchor you. Throughout Polynesia, different islands favored different timbers based on what grew locally. Hawaiians often prized koa, while Samoans leaned toward breadfruit. Each wood carried not only mechanical advantages but spiritual associations. Breadfruit, tied to nourishment and family, seemed gentle. Koa, whose very name means warrior in Hawaiian, carried a weight of pride. You can almost taste the rivalry, light versus strong, buoyant versus durable. The quirky tidbit sneaks in. There are records of canoe builders actually biting into shavings of wood, tasting them to judge freshness and energy. Imagine a room of modern engineers licking circuit boards to see if the solder feels right. You almost chuckle, but in the firelit circle, nobody doubts the bite test. As the debate rolls on, one elder raises his stick and makes a pronouncement. The log must sing when struck. He raps it with his knuckles, and sure enough, a hollow thrum echoes. The younger men nod, pretending they heard what he heard, while you wonder if it's like wine tasting, half ritual, half imagination. Historians still argue whether these tests were scientifically effective or mainly cultural theater. Did the singing log really predict seaworthiness, or was it just an excuse for the elders to show off good ears? You squat down beside a breadfruit trunk, dragging your hand across its pale skin. The grain is softer, almost friendly, while the koa log nearby feels darker, denser, demanding respect. Builders circle them as though choosing between dance partners, each with their quirks and temperaments. One carpenter whispers that koa logs hold grudges if mistreated, splitting in protest. Another insists breadfruit hulls warp like lazy cousins. And so, in a scene both mundane and profound, you realize hours slip away on the beach not from carving, but from arguing. The fire crackles, throwing sparks that drift like fleeting stars. The logs lie heavy, patient, waiting for someone to commit. You breathe in smoke, wood, and salt, the mingled perfumes of indecision. And you think about how you choose things in your own life, sometimes agonizing over options until the tide literally washes away your choices. Someone finally slaps a palm against the koa, declaring it stubborn but worthy. Applause, laughter, groans. A decision, temporary at least. Tomorrow, someone else might argue for breadfruit again. You let the moment sink into your bones, warm and slow, like the weight of wood itself. You lean closer now, the scent of raw sap mingling with sweat, as the first basalt adzes rise and fall against the chosen log. The sound is steady, almost musical, a thunk and scrape that becomes the heartbeat of the worksite. Sparks don't fly here, only tiny curls of wood that scatter like shavings of moonlight. You notice how rhythm governs everything. Each builder has his own cadence, but together they blend into a sleepy percussion, like a wooden drum circle gone minimalist. Here's your mainstream fact. Polynesian builders used adzes made of hard basalt, or sometimes even shell, fitted into wooden handles with fiber lashings. They weren't chiseling with steel, but with rock sharpened so finely it could rival metal. And yet, the motions were slow, deliberate, almost tender, as though each stroke coaxed the canoe into existence. You watch one man pause, check the angle, then resume, his face slack with concentration. The quirky tidbit emerges. Some oral traditions say that the best adzes had names treated as personalities in the workshop. A particularly sharp one might be called Tongue of Shark or Child of Thunder. Imagine naming your hammer Carl and then blaming Carl when a nail bends. Here, though, it's less joke, more reverence. One man taps his odds on the ground before each strike, muttering words only he knows. You wonder if it's prayer or pep talk. Sand piles nearby, and even in this moment, arguments creep in. One youth insists they should carve on firm sand to avoid wobbling. Another says softer sand cushions the log, preventing cracks. Their voices rise, hands gesture wildly, and the rhythm falters as everyone weighs in. Historians still argue whether these sand platforms were genuinely important or simply another excuse for prolonged debate. You imagine a symposium with footnotes, but here it's just bare feet stomping sand flat. The night deepens, and the moon lays a sheen on their tools. You find yourself lulled by the repetition. Thunk, scrape, thunk, scrape. Wood curls fall against your legs, sticking like stubborn confetti. You think about how modern construction roars with engines, saws, and drills, while here the loudest sound is human breath and stone against grain. Oddly, it feels quieter inside your head too, as if the tempo resets your pulse. One builder pauses to chew on dried fish, then returns to carving as though nothing happened. Another hums tunelessly, a rhythm not unlike the waves. You smile at the casual absurdity. Even amid sacred craft, hunger interrupts, and the sacred must wait while someone gnaws a snack. You picture a cathedral builder in Europe halting mid-stone cutting for a sandwich, and it suddenly feels universal. As hours stretch, the hull begins to emerge. Not dramatic, but subtle, like a sculpture whispering its shape into being. Your eyelids grow heavy, following the rise and fall, the endless rhythm that feels as if it could go on until dawn. And honestly, it probably will. You rub the grit from your palms, knowing tomorrow the debates will resume. For now, you simply breathe, in time with the ads. You squat beside the half-hollowed hull as the workshop shifts from chopping to caressing, from bold ad strokes to the maddening subtlety of surface. Someone drags a basket forward. No, not nails, not fancy tools. Just sand in shades of cream, charcoal, and rust. The arguing begins on cue like gulls at a fish market. One camp champions fine coral sand, sifted through woven pandanus. Another insists that volcanic dust, velvety and dark, bites better and leaves the wood swift. You run your fingers through both and feel the difference immediately. Coral sand prickles like powdered seashells. Volcanic dust glides like ground glass. You've stumbled into the most Polynesian thing of all. Debate as craft, beach as supply closet, patience as policy. A builder with arms scarred by old rope burns demonstrates. He takes a pad of bark cloth, dips it in water, sprinkles coral sand on top, and rubs the hull in long, even sweeps. Fine grains whisper as they cut. Another slides in, grinning, with a handful of midnight black cinder sand from the high slopes, patting it onto a damp coconut husk and working in tight circles. "Smoother," he declares. The first man snorts. "Slower." You stay out of it because nothing is more dangerous than picking a side in a sanding war. Mainstream fact time. Softly folded into the scene while your hands gather splinters you pretend are souvenirs. Across Polynesia, craftsmen often used abrasives like coral sand, pumice drifted from distant eruptions, and even shark skin with its tiny tooth-like denticles, nature's pre-industrial sandpaper. You see a coil of dried shark skin hanging from a beam. When someone wraps it around a block and pushes, the hull brightens to a satin sheen that drinks the firelight. A few children stare with the reverence normally reserved for meteors. Then the quirky tidbit shuffles forward. The village's name for one beach downshore is the Barking Sands, because when the grains are bone dry and you step just so, the sand squeaks like a scolded dog. A sly auntie claims that builders would scoop that squeaky stuff for the final polish because wood listens to honest sand. You test a handful, it squeals under your palm, and you try not to giggle. Imagine your hardware store aisle labeled Squeaky Truth 600 Grit. As you watch the procession of opinions, the hull becomes a courtroom. Exhibits are poured from gourds. A self-appointed foreman argues that coarser grit at the start, followed by finer grit near the waterline, gives the best compromise between speed and effort. Another counters that a perfectly uniform polish encourages laminar flow, which he explains by waving both hands like a double-wide fish. A third person taps the hull and swears the wood purrs more under volcanic dust. You look at the surface and see only wood getting smoother, but to them, each micro scratch is a vote. Just a little moisture, one elder warns, sprinkling water with a folded ti leaf. Too dry and the grains skate uselessly, too wet and they clump, gouging. The perfect dampness becomes its own argument. People kneel to feel the sand's coolness, squeeze it, crumble it, smear it onto the hull, and wipe it away with the solemnity of a tea ceremony. You realize you are watching the slowest, sandiest episode of a reality show. So you think you can sand. The prize is a boat that doesn't sulk in a headwind. Historians still argue whether mirror-smooth finishes actually made canoes faster, or whether a faint, deliberate microtexture helped grab the water and reduce drag. An echo of modern debates about golf ball dimples and sharkskin swimsuits. Some field notes praise glassy hulls that shine like a calm lagoon. Others hint that slightly roughened surfaces were not accidents but strategy. You press your cheek to the wood, it's cool and faintly oily, and if there's a measurable difference here, it lives at the scale of whispers. One boy, beaming with the mischief of apprenticeship, tries to speed things up by double-handing the sharkskin pad. It squeals, he grins. The master taps him gently with a knuckle. Slow is smooth, smooth is swift, swift is survival. Another practical aside slips in. A thin wipe of oil, kukui or coconut, often follows the final sanding, sealing the grain and giving the canoe a soft luster that repels water. The oil scent wakes the whole workshop like a quiet bell. It smells of kitchen and voyage at once. You catch the crowd repeating little proverbs as they work. Sand is a tongue. It tells the grain the story it must keep. Dust is how the tree forgets its forest and learns the sea. Are these ancient sayings or tonight's improvisations? Hard to tell. Either way, every pass of the hand is an argument resolved for now, and every new handful of grit is another appeal. You think back to the named adzes, tongue of shark, child of thunder, and it occurs to you that sand deserves names too. Persuader. Peacemaker. Oh no, you missed a spot. The jokes in your head write themselves. Someone proposes mixing coral and volcanic sand, 50-50, and a groan ripples through the group like you just suggested pineapple on an already perfect pizza. Another insists on trialing 3 grits in alternating stripes to see which sheds water best. He's serious. For a moment, the hull looks destined to become a geological zebra. You imagine the ocean taking notes like a strict teacher. When arms tire, hands trade places, and the rhythm settles into long, even breaths. The canoe skin changes slowly, catching the fire's orange, then releasing it, like a living thing practicing how to hold light. A grandmother leans near your shoulder and murmurs that the last passes must be done in the direction the canoe will travel, so luck learns the route. Is that aerodynamics or poetry? You vote poetry, but you rub along the bow just the same, smoothing with the future in mind. By moonrise, a test. Water poured from a calabash beads and slides in a clean ribbon. The believers of coral sand cheer. The volcanic party claims it would have been faster with proper dust. New debate sprouts immediately, of course. Someone hints, only half joking, that the sand should be chosen to match tomorrow's wind, like shoes for weather. You can't help it. You love them for this. The discipline isn't just skill, it's attention, the kind that turns trivial choices into communal meaning. Finally, tools are hung and baskets tied. The hull gleams, not like a mirror exactly, but like a moonlit path. A few stray grains cling to your forearms, and you keep them. Tiny constellations of a night when every pinch of earth argued its case to the sea. You stretch your back, hear it pop like a small drum, and think of sleep. Tomorrow they'll sand again, because perfection, like a tide line, moves when you walk toward it. For tonight, though, the canoe is quiet and the beach forgives the footprints. The night air smells of smoke and salt, and you find yourself watching bundles of coconut husk fibers soaking in a trough. Brown strands float like seaweed, softening in the brine, waiting for the calloused hands that will twist them into ropes strong enough to hold whole oceans at bay. Someone squats nearby, stripping husks into long ribbons with a shell blade. His fingers move so quickly they blur, a reminder that in Polynesia, even rope making looks like sleight of hand. A mainstream fact eases in. Canoe builders across Polynesia lashed hulls, outriggers, and planks together, entirely with cordage rather than nails. Coconut Sennet, as the braided rope is called, was waterproof, durable, and flexible, qualities iron nails never offered in salt water. The lashings could be tightened or replaced, making the canoe a kind of living machine held together by woven patience. You crouch closer, noticing how each strand is rubbed against a thigh to twist, then doubled with another strand, then tripled, then braided into rope. The rhythm is hypnotic. Scrape, twist, pull, hum. One man hums under his breath, and soon others join in, weaving sound into fiber. A quirky tidbit drops from the conversation. Some villages believed the best rope makers were women who had recently given birth, because their renewed strength infused the cord with life. Imagine hiring a maternity ward to string together your fishing nets. The cords pile higher, smelling faintly of coconut and smoke. Builders begin the ceremony of lashings, long passes looped around notches carved into the canoe's ribs. Each knot receives more commentary than a chess game. Should the loop cross left over right? Should tension be set while the cord is wet or dry? Endless arguments, and you marvel at how rope, the humblest of things, becomes the loudest topic. Historians still argue whether these lashings were intentionally tuned for elasticity, letting the hull flex like a spine, or whether flexibility was simply a lucky byproduct. You tug one, and it sings faintly like a stringed instrument. The elders gather, squinting in firelight, correcting every move. Tighter, one insists, pulling until the wood groans. Gentler, another counters, stroking the knot like a cat. At one point, a man spits coconut water into the cord, declaring it will shrink tighter as it dries. Another scoffs, claiming fresh water ruins the fiber. Someone brings seawater instead. You imagine a scientific paper titled Effects of Spit versus Sea on Knot Tension. Peer-reviewed by very stern aunties. Your eyelids droop as the lashings multiply. From stern to bow, the canoe slowly dresses itself in a web of brown fiber, neat and symmetrical. Each junction gleams under the moon, damp rope dark against pale wood. You can't help thinking of tendons connecting bone, muscle binding skeleton, and the canoe itself as a body waiting to move. The lashings pulse in firelight as if veins already circulate. The rope makers pause to chew betel nut, their teeth glowing red. One jokes that if the lashings ever fail, they'll just blame the sand debate crowd. Another quips that the canoe is held together not by cord but by stubbornness. The group erupts in quiet laughter, soft enough not to wake the children curled on mats nearby. As dawn edges closer, you run your palm along the hull, feeling the crisscross patterns like raised tattoos. Each knot is a fingerprint of the hands that tied it. The canoe now hums with readiness, but you know the lashings will keep receiving adjustments. Tightened, retied, fussed over, because perfection is always one knot away. You sigh, half amused, half lulled, and let the rope-burned smell of coconut husk drift into your dreams. You shuffle along the sand, half dreaming, half listening, as the canoe begins to sprout arms, outriggers that jut sideways like the limbs of a cautious crab. A crowd gathers to watch because balance is no simple matter here. The outrigger float must sit just far enough to steady the hull, but not so far that it drags. A line too slack and the canoe tips like a clumsy toddler. Too taut and it fights the waves. The builders circle, muttering, as if 1 inch left or right might decide the fate of generations. Here's your mainstream fact. Polynesian double canoes and outrigger canoes were among the most stable craft of their time, engineered to cross thousands of miles with provisions and passengers. The outrigger wasn't decoration. It countered roll in rough seas, letting a narrow hull slice fast through swells that would swamp a rounder boat. You can almost see the geometry written in their bones, though tonight it plays out in slow-motion gestures and salty arguments. Quirky tidbit for you. Some tales describe canoe builders deliberately wobbling the nearly finished hull in the lagoon, letting it roll until someone shouted, "Enough!" The chosen point became the alignment for the outrigger. Imagine shipwrights at a modern dockyard wobbling submarines like toddlers testing seesaws. Yet here, the wobble is ritual, the joke is serious, and the whole village leans in. The debates run predictable. Should the float sit high, barely skimming water unless the hull heels over? Or should it rest low, biting the waves constantly? One man argues high gives speed, another counters low gives peace of mind. The sand once again becomes courtroom. Sticks stab diagrams, shells mark positions, and children wipe them away mid-argument, sending adults back to square one. Historians still argue whether the outrigger's precise measurements were based on strict formulas or intuitive feel honed by generations. Either way, intuition tonight sounds a lot like bickering. You crouch beside a half-tide boom and watch as cords tighten. The lashings creak, wood answering fiber. One builder squints, leans his whole weight on the float, then shakes his head. "Too stiff," he grumbles, retying. Another pulls it loose again, muttering about flex. You sigh, remembering yesterday's sanding drama. It seems no component escapes trial by argument. The sea watches with silver eyes under the moon. A small swell creeps in and rocks the hull. Everyone gasps, then argues about whether the tilt was natural or caused by the wrong float angle. You stifle a laugh. It's the kind of moment where science and superstition blur. Was that wobble the fault of the lashings, or did a spirit shift in the water? Nobody agrees, so of course the float is moved another finger's breadth outward. Your hands explore the smooth outrigger beam, pale wood polished by countless palms. You imagine it as an arm outstretched, ready to catch the sea when the hull falters. The canoe feels suddenly alive, a creature rehearsing balance before its first long swim. Around you, voices drop lower, muttering like bedtime quarrels, the kind that fade not because anyone won, but because the hour grows late. One elder concludes the debate with a proverb. An outrigger is a friend who steadies you but never carries you. It's half wisdom, half mic drop. For once, the circle nods. The float is tied, the boom tightened, the hull now wearing its sideways limb proudly. You yawn, feeling the tug of sleep in your shoulders, soothed by the thought of balance restored, however temporarily. You smell it before you see it, a sweet, smoky thread drifting from the lean-to by the shoreline, where squat pots sit over coals and sap bubbles like a patient stew. A boy fans the fire with a palm frond, sending sparks like borrowed constellations into the dusk. You step closer and feel heat press your shins as a builder lifts a wooden paddle and stirs. The sap clings and stretches, amber to coffee dark, thickening with every lazy pop. Beside him, a woman grinds charcoal to powder in a shallow bowl, tapping the stone with the same unhurried rhythm that has followed you since the first ad strike. The whole scene smells faintly of honey, smoke, and something resin green that settles at the back of your throat. A mainstream fact to ground you. Canoe builders across Polynesia sealed seams and lashings with plant resins, saps and natural oils, breadfruit latex, coconut, and candlenut. Kukui, among favorites, gently heated and brushed into the wood to shed water and slow rot. The sealant works into the fibers of the lashings too, protecting the very stitches that hold the canoe together. You watch them dip a fringe of pandanus leaves, shake once and stroke the hull in long, even passes. Vapor curls up like incense and disappears into the wind. Each pass leaves a wet sheen that turns the wood from matte moonlight to quiet star glow. The quirky tidbit arrives with a grin. Candle nuts are timepieces as well as ingredients. Strung on a thin rib and lit one by one, they burn with a steady glow, so a 5-nut job means a quick coat, and a whole branch job means don't wait up. Tonight looks like a whole branch plus a generous cousin. Someone lines glossy nuts along the hearth as if scheduling patience, and you find yourself counting with them, nut by nut, the way city people count elevator dings. Not too hot, an elder mutters, tapping the pot with the back of a knife. Too hot, and the wood forgets its manners. Another counters that a hotter coat chases moisture out of the seam. Two opinions, one canoe. This place is powered by debate and coconut husk. Historians still argue whether smoke curing and hot application meaningfully change the wood's resistance to rot, or whether the ritual simply marks a careful maker's touch. You breathe in a ribbon of scented steam and decide that even if the science is fuzzy, the calm it spreads through the workshop is real. They pause to press thin slivers of inner bark, bast teased from pale strips, into a stubborn joint. The fibers drink resin like thirsty mouths. A brush follows and wipes the excess into a dark shine. A builder runs his thumb along the line and nods when no sticky thread oozes back. Tight as gossip, he says, which around here is the accepted unit of watertight. Nearby a smaller pot simmers a thinner mix, meant for the outer skin. A helper flicks a droplet and grins when it beads and slides without soaking. The canoe exhales, if wood can be said to breathe, and you feel your shoulders settle. Voices pick up around you about color. Some prefer a hull darkened with charcoal in the resin, claiming it hides scuffs and keeps the sun from glaring in the helmsman's eyes. Others like a pale, honeyed finish that shows the grain, as if the tree kept a map of its life and lent it to the sea. Someone proposes stripes. Everyone ignores him, mercifully. There's your first joke tonight, don't worry. Several more will politely wander in wearing flip-flops. You run a palm over yesterday's careful sanding and feel the new coat glide beneath your hand like a lagoon at dawn. From the corner, the lashings get their turn. The crew paints resin into the cross-hatched sennit, dabbing and pressing so it soaks deep and sets like flexible armor. The rope drinks and darkens. The knots grow sleek. Seal the mouths so they don't sip the ocean, a woman says, and you picture the cord licking salt like a mischievous dog. Somebody snorts. Somebody else adds, and if it still sips, we teach it manners. The laughter's soft, the kind that oils a community as well as any sap. Debate, of course, shifts to thick versus thin coats. Thick promises durability but risks cracking. Thin promises speed but begs for more layers. One man advocates the two-in-a-whisper method. 2 coats and then a last pass with a nearly dry brush, a whisper of shine. Another prescribes 3 honest coats. No poetry allowed. With the seriousness of elections, they vote by shrug, which somehow counts. Historians still argue whether multiple thin coats were a region-wide tradition or simply the signature of certain islands and their favorite woods. On this beach, the compromise is classic. The first coat to seal, the second to smooth, and a whisper only if the moon approves. You lean in to watch the brushes. They're less brush than little brooms, cord bound to twigs, curls of coconut husk, or fringes of pandanus. Each leaves a slightly different texture, a fingerprint of the tool. A breeze plucks at your hair, swings the smoke toward you, and you taste sweet ash on your tongue. Somewhere beyond the reef, a fish jumps and falls with that soft slap that always sounds closer than it is. The sea keeps time. The candle nuts keep time. Even your breath keeps time with the paddle's slow circle through sap. Inevitable mischief appears. There is always a cousin, suggesting powdered shell mixed into the resin to make the canoe faster. A dozen faces turn. He bravely cites Sharkskin's tiny denticles. For a heartbeat, you think he has them, until Lene and Auntie points toward the sand team and says, "Try that tomorrow, on your own canoe." The lean-to shakes with laughter. Joke number 2. Number 3 is on the way. Patience is also being simmered tonight. They bring the coat to the bow with a little ceremony. Quiet, not showy. A chant starts, low and even, more hum than melody. Your chest loosens with it. The brush slows, skimming the curve, and for a moment the world narrows to wood, smoke, and the old rhythm that outlives everyone singing it. The chant flickers into humor at the final dab on the prow. May this canoe outrun gossip and outlast arguments. Given the track record of your beach committee, good luck with the second part. You help by holding the paddle while a builder scrapes off cooled strings like pulling spider silk from a morning path. The scrap curls on your fingers and leaves a faint shine when you peel it away. It will become fire starter or glue for a basket repair, or maybe just a sticky toy for children until a stern look dissolves it. Nothing is wasted. Everything earns a second life. You remember the named adzes, tongue of shark, child of thunder, and think this pot deserves one too. Perhaps patience, or less poetically, do not lick. There's number 3. As the coats settle, the hull looks less like carved tree and more like intention, as if the sea finally recognizes a future partner. The air grows quieter. Even the sand team seems content, for now, because the wet shine forbids more scratching and redrawing. In the corner, a row of candle nuts blackens gently in the coals, little moons in eclipse. You count time with them without meaning to. 5 nuts, 7, 9. You decide this was a whole branch job, after all. Before the pots are pulled, a final mini argument flares. Should the inside of the hull receive the same treatment? A careful carpenter argues yes to guard against trapped damp. A speed-loving paddler argues no, claiming it adds weight and steals the canoe's sprint. Historians still argue whether lighter interiors were standard practice or simply the preference of particular crews on particular waters. The compromise is elegant. A thin interior coat where water might sit, nothing more. Everyone wins, or at least nobody loses loudly enough to restart the chorus. By the time the fire quiets to a red smile, the canoe gleams like wet stone at low tide. You can smell tomorrow in that shine. The test launches, the inevitable new complaints, the quiet pride. Someone hands you a sliver of breadfruit roasted in the coals, and its caramel sweetness surprises you. You chew slowly and think, fine, if the ocean comes for you, at least you'll go out glazed. The morning sun stretches long fingers across the beach, and you duck into a cavernous shed that smells of dust, salt, and lingering smoke. It's not exactly a shed in the modern sense, more like a cathedral of poles and palm thatch, sloping low on one side so winds don't tear it away. Inside, half-finished canoes rest like giant sleeping whales, their bellies propped on logs, their skins dull where resin hasn't yet been rubbed in. Shadows pool thick around the beams, broken only by shafts of sunlight that stab through holes in the roof, spotlighting curls of wood on the floor. A mainstream fact steadies you here. Many Polynesian societies built canoe houses, Halaua'a in Hawaii or Farvaya in Tahiti, places both practical and sacred. They weren't mere workshops. They were sanctuaries where knowledge passed from master to apprentice, where tools were stored, and where rituals bound community to craft. Some were long enough to swallow multiple double-hulled canoes side by side, their dimensions dwarfing anything else in the village. The quirky tidbit drifts down like dust motes. Certain villages prohibited whistling inside the canoe house, fearing the sound would call mischievous winds that might later wreck a voyage. You catch yourself before a whistle slips, your lips drying into a sheepish grin. Imagine an OSHA poster reading, "No hard hats, no whistling, no accidental typhoons." Your eyes adjust and you notice the hush. Even the most argumentative builders lower their voices here, as though the canoes themselves are listening. Lashings creak faintly as fibers settle. Resin carries a sleepy sweetness. The hush makes every sound stand out. Scraping, a cough, a hammer of knuckles, checking hull tightness. Children peek in but are quickly shooed away, their laughter breaking the spell. You feel the mood press down like heavy blankets. And yet, a whisper of debate still sneaks in. Some argue the sheds should be built with floors of packed coral sand to keep moisture down. Others prefer bare earth, claiming the wood breathes better. You shake your head, smiling. Even in sanctuaries, sand has its jury. Historians still argue whether these floors were chosen for function or symbolism. Did coral suggest purity or simply make sweeping easier? You run a palm along one unfinished prow and feel the grain rise under your touch. The canoe looks both formidable and fragile, like a beast half born. On its side hangs a line of tools: adzes wrapped in bark cloth, brushes of coconut husk stiffened with resin, even a few sharkskin pads drying. The tools dangle like charms, swaying when the sea breeze sneaks under the eaves. You almost expect them to rattle warnings if you step too close. A master builder crouches at the far end, tightening lashings with slow precision. His lips move, chanting a phrase you can't catch. Another hums tunelessly as he sharpens and adds on a river stone, each scrape echoing like a cricket in a cavern. They do not speak loudly, but the whole shed feels alive with murmurs, as if the canoes themselves sigh in their sleep. The longer you linger, the more hypnotic it becomes. Dust rises with each shuffle of your feet, catching the sunlight like gold. You swear the beams overhead creak in time with the sea beyond the door. A boy brings in a calabash of water, sets it down, and tiptoes back, as if afraid the canoes might scold him for spilling. One elder glances at you, then at the ceiling, and mutters about leaks. Half complaint, half omen. Another argues the holes are gifts, letting sun bless the holes. You chuckle softly at the eternal rhythm. Debate, always debate, no matter how sacred the space. The canoes rest unmoved, perhaps amuse themselves. When you finally step back out into daylight, the contrast blinds you. Gills wheel overhead, surf crashes, and you blink against brightness. But some part of you stays inside the shed, in the cool hush where boats wait like dreams in wooden skin. You trudge down the slope of the beach where the surf hisses like a simmering pot, and here the work takes on a strangely comic dignity. Men dragging the hulls back and forth, testing them on sand like giant children with oversized toys. The canoes groan, ropes strain, and the ground itself becomes the great laboratory. Someone cups a handful of grains and lets them sift through his fingers, declaring, "Too soft." Another stomps, heel deep, and insists, "Too firm." You watch them argue about sand the way philosophers argue about truth, each certain his bare foot knows better. Mainstream fact: in many islands, new canoes were tested on beaches before touching water, not only to check balance, but to feel how the hull slid. Builders learned about friction, weight distribution, and even keel alignment by dragging boats over sand, using it as the world's cheapest dry dock. You can see their logic. If it drags straight here, maybe it will sail straight out there. Then comes the quirky tidbit. Oral traditions from some atolls suggest builders secretly ranked beaches by how honest their sand was, swearing that certain stretches revealed flaws better than others. A hull tested on liar's sand, as one legend calls it, might glide beautifully on shore yet stumble in surf. It's the ancient version of blaming your treadmill for lying about your cardio. You grin at the thought of beach Yelp reviews. 3 stars, nice view, but deceptive drag. The scene grows absurd. A group drags the hull across soft coral sand. It sinks, scraping, and everyone groans. Another group insists on the firmer volcanic strip upshore, but there, the boat jerks and chatters like teeth in cold water. Voices rise, arms wave, and soon a dozen people are redrawing diagrams in sand again. Historians still argue whether these sand trials were genuinely diagnostic or merely another ritualized excuse to involve the whole village. Standing here, you suspect both. You join in, pressing your heel into the damp margin where waves just retreated. The sand feels springy, firm, yet forgiving. You suggest it, half joking. Immediately, the debate splits again. Too wet, says one. Too shifting, says another. Yet soon a rope is tied and a dozen shoulders heave. The hull glides more smoothly, leaving a track that glistens like a scar across the shore. For a fleeting moment, everyone agrees. Children run alongside, laughing as if this were less engineering and more parade. A girl holds up a shell and declares it the official measure of drag. Each trial becomes theater, Men pretending to frown, then secretly smiling when their preferred sand performs better. The canoe itself seems to sigh, tired of being an unwilling contestant in this eternal talent show. Arguments flicker even about footwear. Should one test barefoot for truest feel or with woven sandals to mimic long journeys? Someone insists bare soles never lie. Another insists soles bruise and skew judgment. You almost laugh out loud. If sand grains had ears, they'd be smug. The tide creeps closer, licking the canoe's shadow. Soon they must move it higher or risk losing their precious log to the ocean's impatience. You sense a compromise forming. Test at low tide on firmer wet sand, then polish and relash before daring the sea. A builder pats the hull like a horse, whispering reassurance as if it might bolt. The canoe creaks but stays. When the sun dips lower, you realize you've spent hours watching people argue with the beach. And yet, in their quarrels, the hull has smoothed, the lashings tightened, and the boat has learned to slide straighter. You sigh with a sleepy smile. Progress here is measured not in miles but in inches of sand scuff. By twilight, the debates over sand and sliding finally give way to something quieter, almost reverent. You hear it before you see it, a low, rolling murmur, like the sea itself has decided to speak in syllables. Builders gather in a half circle, faces tilted toward the canoe, and the priest steps forward with a bundle of leaves. His chant begins deep and steady, words you don't quite catch, yet they press against your chest as if you've swallowed a drumbeat. Mainstream fact to fold in gently. Across Polynesia, canoe launching and construction often included ritual chants and blessings. In Hawaii, priests recited Oli to dedicate a canoe, while in Tahiti or Samoa, priests invoked ancestors and sea gods to ensure safe voyages. The words carried practical instructions hidden in rhythm, but more importantly, they announced that the vessel was more than wood. It was a being entering the world. You kneel with the others as smoke curls upward from a bowl of smoldering leaves. The quirky tidbit arrives here. Some chants doubled as mnemonic devices, embedding navigational knowledge in the ritual. Imagine singing a blessing that also slips in the coordinates of the Pleiades, or instructions on when to tack at dawn. A lullaby, a GPS, and a prayer rolled into one. The priest's voice deepens, joined by the builders in ragged harmony. You sense a call and response undercurrent, half prayer, half performance review. Each line praises the adze, the rope, the sand, the patience, then slyly notes where carelessness must not linger. Even here, debate sneaks in, through ritual words. Historians still argue whether these chants were strictly spiritual or pragmatic checklists disguised in poetry. You sit cross-legged in the glow, thinking both can be true, faith that floats and reminders that tighten knots. One elder waves a branch dipped in salt water, flicking droplets across the hull. Each bead clings, then vanishes as resin drinks it in. A boy giggles when a drop lands on his nose. An aunt hushes him gently. The canoe is the center now, a newborn in need of soft voices. A chant rises describing stars, Orion's belt, the Southern Cross, the curling line of Scorpius. The melody grows higher, the rhythm steadier, until even your own breathing falls into time. You realize they're not only blessing the canoe, they're rehearsing the sea's language, teaching it through song before it ever touches water. The hull gleams faintly in firelight, listening. Your mind drifts with the rhythm. You imagine a meeting room today where a project manager begins with a prayer, a song, and a sprinkle of seawater over laptops. The thought makes you grin. Someone would surely spill coffee. Joke one logged. Another moment of humor ripples when the priest's voice cracks mid-verse and the chorus rushes to cover, like uncles singing karaoke after 3 beers. Joke 2 logged. The laughter is soft, quickly swallowed back into solemnity, but the canoe doesn't seem to mind. Then comes the chant about winds. The priest's tone lifts, steady as a rising tide, and the crowd answers. Winds of east, winds of west, crosswinds, headwinds, tailwinds, all named, all invited to behave. The litany is half meteorology, half plea. You almost want to join in, though your accent would drown the harmony. You whisper anyway, the names sliding from your lips like passwords to the weather. Finally, silence spreads, thick and soft. The fire pops once, a resin bubble bursting. Everyone bows their heads. The canoe now feels different. Less like an object, more like a guest of honor. A girl lays a garland of leaves across the bow, the green catching faint starlight. You rub your arms, not from chill, but from the shiver of recognition. This thing of wood, cord, and sand is about to have a soul. The fire burns lower now, embers pulsing like lazy hearts, and you shift closer to where the sand has become blackboard again. Except this time, it isn't hull curves or outrigger angles. Instead, the surface bristles with lines and dots, scratched in careful rows. Constellations reborn as doodles. A builder kneels, his stick hovering over Orion's belt, then sliding to the Southern Cross. His voice is steady, almost professorial, except barefoot and shirtless under stars that are the original lecture hall ceiling. Mainstream fact: Polynesian navigation relied on memorized star maps, wave patterns, and even bird flight. Navigators carried this knowledge not on paper but in mind, rehearsed through chants, gestures, and sand drawings. What you see here is no child's game. It's the chalkboard of the Pacific, erased each tide but redrawn endlessly in memory. The quirky tidbit surfaces like a fish. Some navigators trained by lying inside pits on the beach, feeling the faint rhythms of waves through sand, learning to distinguish swells arriving from different horizons. You picture them as human seismographs, recording ocean pulses while staring at stars. Tonight, you can almost feel it yourself, the faint throb under your palms, as if the entire island breathes. The group murmurs about which star to follow first. One insists that setting out on the rising of Sirius guarantees a swift voyage. Another argues for Pleiades, their 7 points of friendlier omen. Historians still argue whether the first star chosen truly altered timing or was symbolic. A way of telling crews, we leave at dawn, not dusk. Around the fire, though, the debate is alive, sticks stabbing dots into sand as if the constellations themselves were being cross-examined. You lean back, gazing at the real sky. The sand map below mirrors the stars above, a shimmering double vision. Children trace arcs with their fingers, learning without realizing. One girl pretends the dots are seashells on a necklace. Her grandmother laughs but corrects her hand, guiding it toward Polaris, the steadfast northern anchor. You realize teaching here is equal parts scolding and storytelling, a pedagogy older than books. Someone erases part of the drawing with a heel, then redraws the line with exaggerated flourish, insisting the arc was too shallow. Arguments ripple. Was the star's rising angle steeper? Did the stick drift? You watch them wrangle as if geometry itself were gossip. Joke 1 tonight lands when a man draws a crooked star line and claims, "It was cloudy that night." The others roar, slap his back, then redraw. The chant returns, this time not to bless but to rehearse. A rhythm naming stars in sequence, a melody you could almost mistake for lullaby if not for its precision. The group sways with it, half asleep, half alert, drilling waypoints into muscle memory. Joke 2 slides in quietly. Someone yawns so loudly mid-chant that the line fractures into giggles. The priest clears his throat like a strict teacher, but even he chuckles. You kneel again, pressing your palm into the cool sand. Grains cling, reflecting starlight like tiny mirrors. The map is fragile. One wave could erase it in seconds. Yet the knowledge endures, carried in heads, passed mouth to ear, stick to finger. You feel the irony. The most advanced navigation system of the ancient world is drawn on the world's most temporary tablet. Historians still argue whether this fragility made the learning sharper, memorize, or lose it. or whether it was simply the cheapest medium available. Either way, the sand scribbles glow with authority tonight. At last, the map is complete, a sweep from horizon to horizon, with arcs for swells and notches for wind. The group leans back, satisfied. A breeze lifts, carrying the smell of brine, as if the ocean itself nodded in agreement. You breathe in, eyelids heavy, soothed by the knowledge that the canoe waiting in the shed will soon know these same constellations. For now, the stars shine down twice, once above, once below, and you rest between their gaze. Morning breaks hazy, and the sea glitters like a sheet of hammered bronze. You stumble toward the lagoon where the canoe waits half in, half out of the surf, ropes tied to driftwood stakes. A crowd has gathered again because today is for trial voyages, short launches, cautious dips into the water's mouth. Builders hover, half nervous, half smug, as if every grain of sand they argued over might now be put on trial. Mainstream fact glides in. New Polynesian canoes were often tested in sheltered waters first, their balance, lashings, and hull integrity examined before venturing into open sea. These rehearsals could last days or weeks with adjustments after every wobble or leak. You watch the canoe rock gently and already men crouch low, eyes darting the seams for the first betraying drip. The quirky tidbit splashes forward. Some accounts tell of builders sprinkling sand from the chosen perfect beach onto the hull before the first launch, as if transferring its honesty onto the boat. A superstition, or maybe just one last dig at rivals. Sure enough, a boy runs up now, clutching a calabash of sand and scattering it across the prow to cheers and groans from opposite factions. Even here, the sand debate paddles along. The canoe is shoved forward. Water rushes up, slaps the sides, and for a breath it holds. Then tilt. The outrigger bites too deep, jerking the hull sideways. Shouts erupt. "Too stiff," cries one group. "Too loose," cries another. Ropes are untied, retied, tugged until knuckles blanch. Historians still argue whether these constant adjustments were evidence of finely tuned engineering or simply endless hedging. To you, it feels like both. Meticulous craft dressed in theatrical argument. Another push. This time the canoe noses forward cleanly, slicing water like a knife through melon. A cheer ripples, quickly cut off when a leak trickles from the stern seam. Men scramble, pressing resin paste into the gap, while hecklers shout advice from the shore. You grin because even leaks are fuel for debate. Was the lash too dry, the resin too thin, the sand under the hull too damp when it was tested? Everything eventually circles back to sand. Joke one floats in when someone claims the leak is just the canoe crying from joy. Laughter cracks tension. The paddlers bail anyway, singing mock solemn laments to a weepy hull. Joke two arrives when a dog leaps in, paddling alongside, clearly convinced this trial voyage is just a bigger version of bath time. People shout that the dog has better form than the paddlers. The canoe turns, wobbles, steadies. Paddlers adjust strokes, calling rhythm. The outrigger dips and rises, finding a groove. You feel the shift. What was argument becomes silence, bodies leaning together, timing smoothing. The canoe glides farther out, then loops back toward shore. For the first time, voices hush. It isn't flawless, but it floats, it moves, it returns. The sea itself offers a grade, pass with corrections. Back on land, the critiques resume like a chorus of school teachers. Tighten here. Sand smoother there. The float sits proud. The bow drags. It's exhausting, endearing, inevitable. You imagine a panel show called Canoe Idol, where each elder offers scathing reviews while the canoe sulks in silence. By dusk, after 3 launches and countless reties, the canoe still stands, damp but dignified. Children smear more sand on its hull as if blessing it anew. The builders lean back, rubbing sore shoulders, still bickering softly about grit size. not order, and whose dog swims straighter. You sigh, lulled by the rhythm. Launch, leak, argue, adjust, repeat. It's the Pacific version of debugging code. Always one more test, one more fix, one more stubborn argument with sand. The lagoon glows under late afternoon sun, and you can almost feel the air sharpen as gossip drifts in like seabirds circling scraps. Trial voyages are one thing, but nothing stirs a village like comparisons. Word travels faster than a trade wind. The canoe from the western beach ran straighter. The one from upriver was faster. Before you know it, the shoreline fills with talk of island rivalries, each canoe held up like a prize fighter, and a match nobody remembers agreeing to. Mainstream fact to steady you. Throughout Polynesia, competition among islands often extended to their canoes, which served as both practical transport and proud symbols of skill. Voyaging wasn't just survival, it was prestige. Communities were judged by how swift, how steady, how beautiful their vessels proved. And so, bragging rights mattered as much as food supply. The quirky tidbit sneaks in with a grin. In some tales, canoes were raced not by paddlers, but by pushing them along sand, with teams of villagers. Whoever got their canoe to the waterline first earned bragging rights for the whole season. You imagine sweaty men grunting, dragging logs while aunties yelled advice from the shade. Tonight's equivalent? Arguments about which beach's sand made the hole honest and which made it lazy? The rivalries surface with sharp tongues. One man insists his uncle's canoe always outran others because their sanding beach was firmer, more disciplined. Another counters that softer sand creates truer balance. Soon you realize these debates are less about physics and more about pride. Nobody wants to admit their beach produces anything but perfection. Historians still argue whether such rivalries drove innovation or simply prolonged centuries of bickering. Watching the intensity here, you suspect both. Joke 1 erupts when a fisherman declares that another village cheats by oiling their hulls with leftover pig fat. No wonder their canoes glide. They're roasting them first. The crowd roars. Joke 2 follows when a youth mimics rival paddlers, exaggerating strokes so sloppy that everyone doubles over. Even the priest chuckles, though he hides it behind his hand. The canoe you've followed becomes the subject of pointed comparisons. Too wide at the bow, one rival sneers. But steady and chop, counters its defender. Slower than a drifting turtle, someone mutters. You expect fists, but instead the insults drift into laughter, absorbed like surf into sand, because underneath the rivalry lies shared respect. Each canoe, regardless of birthplace, is still a child of the same ocean. As dusk spreads, you feel the rivalry mellow into stories. Elders recall voyages where canoes from different islands raced side by side across open sea, each crew singing louder to mask their fatigue. Victories blur into legends, defeats soften into jokes, but the pride endures. You realize this gossip isn't about canoes at all, it's about belonging, each island defending its patch of sand with stubborn tenderness. The stars prick through purple sky and voices quiet. Someone hums, someone stretches. The canoe rests heavy on its rollers, oblivious to the rivalries swirling around it. Tomorrow, adjustments will continue. But tonight, under shared laughter and teasing, you sense a truth. Rivalry may sting, but it also stitches islands together, binding them with the same cord that lashes plank to plank. Night drapes itself over the village again, and you settle near the fire where elders sit cross-legged, voices softer now, weaving memory and myth together. The canoe rests in the shadows nearby, gleaming faintly like a listening animal. Here, debate loosens into storytelling. A grandfather begins with a sigh, reminding the circle that every canoe carries not just people, but the weight of ancestors, every plank an echo of journeys long gone. Mainstream fact comes to you like a steady wave. Polynesian oral traditions preserved navigation, construction techniques, and histories in layered stories that blended fact with legend. Without writing, memory became archive, and elders the librarians. Tonight, those libraries open. One elder describes Tangaloa, god of the sea, who gifted the first canoe design after overhearing mortals argue about sand firmness. His patience, the elder claims, wore thin, so he dropped a model canoe from the sky, splashing mortals into silence. Another countertale insists it was Maui, that mischievous hero, who carved the first hull from a giant fish's backbone, using volcanic dust as polish. You grin, it's myth, but it sounds suspiciously like the same old sand debate dressed in divine costumes. Quirky tidbit drifts in. Some families trace their genealogy through particular canoes, naming them as ancestors. A vessel might be remembered for a century, its voyages recited at feasts. A canoe was not just wood and rope, it was kin, with personality, temperament, even grudges. You imagine filling out a family tree: mother, father, children, canoe. Thanksgiving would need a bigger table. The elders chuckle among themselves, teasing one another's versions. Your story leaves out the part where Tangaloa sneezes on the mast, one says. Another insists his grandmother's tale includes a jealous crab who wanted to steer. They bicker gently, but the warmth in their tone is different from the sharpness of daytime arguments. Historians still argue whether these myths encoded technical knowledge or were simply bedtime entertainment. Tonight you feel the line dissolve. Why can't they be both? A boy pipes up asking if the canoe can hear them. An elder pats the hull and replies, "Of course. That's why you speak kindly." The boy gasps, then whispers apologies for every time he threw sand at the builders. The crowd laughs, joke one logged, tender and true. Later, another elder warns that canoes sometimes hold grudges if not launched properly, refusing to steer straight. Someone quips, "Like my brother-in-law at weddings," and the laughter doubles, joke two logged. The story's slow, voices dropping lower. One tale recalls a voyage guided by a ghost light that hovered over the bow, leading sailors safely to land. Another recounts a canoe cursed for leaving without blessing, capsizing 3 times until its builders admitted fault. The myths lean gently, swaying like hammocks, equal parts warning and lullaby. You sit with the warmth of fire, resin, and smoke wrapping around you like a blanket. The canoe gleams softly as if absorbing each word. You realize this is how memory survives, not carved into stone, but murmured into ears night after night, fire after fire, until every lash and every grain of sand holds story. The elders' voices become softer still, almost indistinguishable from the tide. You close your eyes lulled, the canoe watching over you like an old guardian. And now, as the last spray falls and the canoe steadies on the horizon, you let your breathing slow with the waves. The voices of the builders fade into a gentle murmur, like distant surf breaking softly against a reef. The fire is long gone cold. The chants have slipped into memory, and the sand that carried so many arguments lies smooth again, its surface blank, waiting for the next line, the next footprint, the next dream. You imagine the canoe out there, sails slack, floating on a sea of silver light. The lashings hold, the resin gleams, the outrigger hums in rhythm with each crest. It moves slowly, calmly, not racing anywhere, simply existing between water and sky. You let your shoulders loosen, sinking into that rhythm until even your heartbeat feels like another paddle dipping into water. The arguments about grit size and rope tension feel distant now, softened by time, like voices heard through a wall. What remains is the quiet pride, the shared laughter, the sense of something made together. Every knot, every handful of sand, every whispered chant has folded itself into this vessel, and it drifts onward whether you watch or not. Your eyelids grow heavier as you picture stars guiding the canoe, each one a faint lamp in a limitless ceiling. The vessel follows them patiently, a moving island of wood and breath. You rest with it, letting the ocean's wide calm seep into you. So breathe deeper now, Let the debates turn into lullabies, the sanding into a hush, the rope lashings into a cradle. The canoe slides away and you slide with it, gently toward sleep. The journey continues, but for tonight it carries you only into rest.